It began with an accident. I wasn't looking for anything, wasn't suspicious of him, wasn't paranoid. My husband, Ethan, was the kind of man you would call reliable. He always kept his promises, came home on time, and even helped with the dishes after dinner. We had been married for 6 years, and although things weren't perfect, they never are they? I thought we were solid, stable. That illusion shattered one rainy afternoon. Ethan had left his phone on the kitchen counter, something he rarely did. He was meticulous about his devices, always keeping them close. But that day he was rushing to leave for a meeting, and I guess he just forgot. I wasn't even paying attention to it at first. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when the screen lit up with a notification. It wasn't a text or an email. The app icon was unfamiliar. A white flame against a red background. I frowned trying to place it. Tinder? No, that couldn't be right. Why would my husband have Tinder on his phone? My stomach tightened as I stared at the screen, the knife in my hand forgotten. Another notification popped up. You have a new match, it read. My heart pounded as I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling. Unlocking it was easy, I knew his passcode. I told myself it was probably nothing, a leftover app from before we met or some kind of prank. But when I opened it, the truth stared back at me, impossible to deny. Ethan's profile was there, complete with a photo I'd never seen before. He was smiling, younger somehow, wearing a shirt I didn't recognize. The bio read, adventurous, funny, and looking for someone to share life's best moments. Discreet and drama-free. Discreet. Drama-free. My vision blurred with tears. I scrolled through the matches, each one a knife to my heart. There were so many. Women of all ages, some beautiful, others ordinary. All of them completely unaware that the man they were flirting with was married. Married to me. I felt sick. My legs barely carried me to the couch, where I sat clutching his phone like it was a live grenade. The man I thought I knew was a stranger. Who was he? Who was I married to? That night I didn't confront him. I couldn't. I needed answers first, needed to piece together the truth before I could face him. Over the next few days I became a woman possessed. I waited until he was asleep or in the shower to comb through his phone. The more I uncovered, the darker it got. There wasn't just Tinder. There were other apps, some I'd never even heard of, and countless messages. He had entire conversations with women, some flirty, others explicit. But that wasn't the worst of it. The real betrayal came when I realized this wasn't just about lust or boredom. Ethan had been living a double life. There were receipts for hotel rooms, dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, and even small, thoughtful gifts, none of which were for me. He had a second phone, hidden in the glove compartment of his car. It was cheap, a burner phone, but the messages on it told me everything I needed to know. He had been seeing one woman regularly for nearly a year. Her name was Alyssa, and from what I could gather, she thought he was single. Their texts were nauseatingly sweet, full of inside jokes and plans for the future. He told her he traveled often for work, which explained his frequent business trips. I couldn't breathe. Every memory we had together felt tainted, rewritten by the knowledge that he had been sharing parts of himself with someone else. I wanted to hate Alyssa, but how could I? She didn't know. She wasn't the one who vowed to love me until death did us part. That was him. I started keeping a journal, documenting every discovery. It was my only way to process the storm of emotions inside me. Anger, heartbreak, humiliation. It all came in waves, crashing over me until I felt like I was drowning. Yet I couldn't stop. I needed to know everything, even if it destroyed me. One night, after weeks of gathering evidence, I finally confronted him. It was late, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I waited until he was seated on the couch, scrolling through Netflix like everything was normal. I know, I said, my voice shaking. He looked up confused. Know what? I threw his phone onto the coffee table. About the apps. The women. Alyssa. His face went pale. For a moment he didn't say anything, just stared at me like a deer caught in headlights. Then he stammered. I can explain. No, I cut him off, my anger finally breaking through the tears. You don't get to explain. You lied to me. You've been lying for years. Do you even love me? Or was I just convenient? He tried to deny it at first, but when I laid out everything I knew, the hotel receipts, the burner phone, the messages, he stopped. His shoulders slumped and he looked away, ashamed. "I never meant to hurt you," he said softly. I laughed bitterly. "You never meant to hurt me? Ethan, you tore our life apart. You made me doubt everything. Who are you?" "Because the man I married would never do this." His excuses were pathetic. He talked about feeling trapped, about wanting excitement, about how it wasn't about me. But it was about me. It had to be. I wasn't enough for him, and that realization cut deeper than anything else. In the end, I packed a bag and left. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. The betrayal was too big, too consuming. As I drove away, tears streaming down my face, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the life I thought we had, and relief that I finally knew the truth. Ethan wasn't the man I thought he was. And now I had to figure out who I was without him. I spent that first night in a motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and threadbare sheets. It was nothing like home, but then again, home didn't feel real anymore. Everything I thought I knew about my life had been flipped upside down, and I was left to sift through the wreckage. I lay awake for hours, staring at the water-stained ceiling, my mind racing. How could I not have seen the signs? How could I have been so blind? Was I too trusting? Too naive? The questions were endless, each one a stab to the heart. By morning, my anger had dulled into a cold, quiet determination. I wasn't just going to wallow in pain. I needed to understand how it had come to this. I needed closure, even if it tore me apart. So, I went back to the house while I knew Ethan would be at work. The thought of seeing him made my stomach churn, but I didn't have a choice. I needed clothes, my laptop, my passport, everything I would need to start over. The house felt different when I stepped inside, like it belonged to someone else. The photos on the walls, the furniture we'd picked out together, even the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. It all felt like a lie. I grabbed what I needed as quickly as I could, not wanting to linger. But as I was packing, something compelled me to go back to his phone. I didn't know why. Maybe I thought there was more to find, something that would help me make sense of it all. I sat on the bed, his phone in my hands, and opened the Messages app. My breath caught in my throat when I saw a new text from Alyssa. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same hotel." My hand shook as I stared at the screen. He hadn't even stopped. Not after I confronted him, not after everything came crashing down. He was still living his double life as if I didn't matter at all. A fire lit inside me. I wasn't going to sit back and let him get away with it. I texted Alyssa back. "Yes, same hotel. I'll be there at 8. Then I deleted the message thread, so he wouldn't see it, and left the house before I lost my nerve. That evening, I arrived at the hotel a little before 8, parking in the back where I wouldn't be seen. I didn't know what I was planning to do. Confront her? Confront him? Both? My heart was pounding as I walked into the lobby, scanning the room for any sign of Ethan or Alyssa. She was easy to spot. Long, wavy blonde hair, a figure that turned heads, and a confident air about her. She was seated at the bar, a glass of red wine in her hand. My stomach churned as I watched her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of me with the person I'd seen in Ethan's messages. She looked so normal, so completely unaware of the chaos she was a part of. I approached her slowly, my palms sweating. "Alyssa?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She turned, her eyes widening slightly. "Yes. I'm Ethan's wife," I said, letting the words hang in the air like a bomb. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to something that looked almost like pity. "Oh my God," she whispered. I didn't know." I believed her. It was clear from the way her face fell, the way her hand trembled as she set down her glass. She gestured to the seat next to her, and I sat, my body rigid with tension. "I thought he was single," she said after a moment, her voice shaky. "He told me he was divorced." "I'm so sorry. If I had known." "It's not your fault," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of my words. "He lied to both of us." We talked for nearly an hour, piecing together the fragments of his lies. She told me about their dates, their conversations, the plans they'd made. Every detail was like a dagger to my chest, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know the full extent of his betrayal. By the end of it, Alyssa looked as devastated as I felt. "I'm ending it," she said firmly. "I don't want anything to do with him." It should have felt like a victory, but it didn't. Nothing about this felt like a win. As I left the hotel, I realized I didn't just hate Ethan for what he'd done to me. I pitied him. He had destroyed the life we'd built together, hurt people who cared about him, and for what? A few fleeting moments of excitement? A temporary escape from reality? In the days that followed, I began to rebuild. I contacted a lawyer, started therapy, and leaned on my friends for support. They rallied around me, their love and encouragement a lifeline as I navigated the aftermath of Ethan's betrayal. It wasn't easy. Some days the pain felt unbearable, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. But other days I felt stronger, more certain of who I was and what I deserved. Ethan tried to reach out, of course. He sent flowers, left voicemails, even showed up at my friend's house when he couldn't find me. But I didn't give in. I knew better now. Love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. It wasn't supposed to be a constant battle for trust, a never-ending game of second-guessing and suspicion. One evening, as I sat on my new apartment's balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never let anyone dim my light again. Ethan had taken enough from me. It was time to take my life back. As the weeks turned into months, the numbness I had lived with began to fade, replaced by a cautious sense of self-discovery. Life without Ethan was strange at first, like trying to walk after a long period of sitting still. I would catch myself hesitating over small decisions: what to eat for dinner, where to go on a Sunday afternoon, because for so many years those decisions had revolved around us. Now it was just me. And while the silence was unsettling at times, it also held a strange kind of freedom. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could focus on something other than the swirling thoughts in my head. My coworkers, most of whom didn't know the full story, were kind and supportive in ways they probably didn't realize. They invited me to after-work drinks, made me laugh with silly office gossip, and reminded me that there was still a world outside of my shattered marriage. Therapy became my anchor. At first, I was skeptical, unsure how talking to a stranger could possibly help me untangle the mess Ethan had left behind. But my therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Harper, had a way of guiding me through my pain without letting me drown in it. She helped me see that Ethan's betrayal wasn't about me. It was about his own insecurities, his own inability to face himself. That realization didn't erase the hurt, but it lessened the guilt I had carried, the nagging feeling that somehow I hadn't been enough. One day, as I sat across from Dr. Harper, she asked me a question that stuck with me long after our session ended. What do you want your life to look like now? It seemed like such a simple question, but it opened a door I hadn't dared to approach. What did I want? For so long, my dreams had been tied to Ethan's, my future mapped out alongside his. Now I had a blank canvas, and the thought both thrilled and terrified me. I started small. I redecorated my apartment, painting the walls a soft, calming green and filling the space with plants. I took up yoga, something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. I even signed up for a cooking class, learning how to make dishes that didn't involve takeout menus or rushed weeknight dinners. These small acts of self-care felt like rebellion against the version of myself that had been so consumed by keeping our marriage afloat. But the real turning point came one evening when I received a message from Alyssa. She had reached out to me once before, shortly after our meeting at the hotel, to apologize again and let me know she had cut ties with Ethan. I hadn't expected to hear from her after that, but her message this time was different. "Hi, I hope this isn't intrusive," she wrote. "I've been thinking about everything we talked about, and I realized I never really asked how you were doing. If you ever want to grab a coffee and talk, I'm here." At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. Alyssa was a reminder of everything I had lost, but she was also someone who had been deceived, just like me. Against my better judgment, or maybe because I was curious, I agreed to meet her. We chose a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where you could linger over a cup of coffee without feeling rushed. When I walked in, Alyssa was already there, her blonde hair pulled back into a loose braid. She looked nervous, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug, but she smiled when she saw me. "I'm so glad you came," she said as I sat down. For a moment, neither of us knew what to say. But then she started talking, telling me about how she had been trying to make sense of everything Ethan had done, how she felt angry and used but also deeply ashamed for believing his lies. Her vulnerability disarmed me, and before I knew it, I was opening up to her too. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, our frustrations, and even a few bitter laughs about Ethan's pathetic excuses. By the time we left the cafe, something unexpected had happened. Alyssa no longer felt like a threat or a reminder of my pain. She felt like an ally, someone who understood my experience in a way no one else could. We exchanged numbers, promising to stay in touch, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. As the months went on, I continued to rebuild brick by brick. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends and even making new ones. I went on a few dates, nothing serious, but enough to remind myself that I was still capable of being seen and appreciated. It wasn't about finding someone new. It was about rediscovering myself, the woman I had been before Ethan and the woman I was becoming without him. Ethan, meanwhile, tried to worm his way back into my life. He sent letters, long-winded apologies that oscillated between groveling and blaming his emotional struggles. He showed up at my doorstep once, unshaven and hollow-eyed, begging for another chance. But I was done. The part of me that had once loved him was gone, burned away by his lies. Letting him back in would have been like inviting poison into my life, and I had worked too hard to heal to let that happen. One day, while organizing my closet, I found our wedding album tucked away in a box. For a moment I considered throwing it out, but instead, I sat down and flipped through the pages. The photos felt like relics of a different life, one that no longer belonged to me. I didn't cry or feel angry. Instead, I closed the album, put it back in the box, and pushed it to the back of the closet. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward. Eventually, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd be: happy. It wasn't the kind of happiness that comes from grand gestures or sweeping changes. It was quiet, steady, rooted in the knowledge that I had survived something that could have broken me. I had faced the truth, no matter how painful, and come out stronger on the other side. Looking back, I realized that Ethan's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, had also given me something unexpected: clarity. It forced me to confront the parts of myself I had ignored, to find strength in my vulnerability, and to rebuild my life on my own terms. And for that I was grateful, not to him but to myself. I had saved myself, and that was a victory no one could take away. The clarity I gained over time didn't come all at once. It was gradual, like the slow, steady breaking of dawn after a long, sleepless night. There were days when I felt as though I had conquered the pain, only to have it creep back in unexpectedly. A song on the radio, a couple holding hands at the park, even the way the sunlight hit my kitchen counter. It could all remind me of the life I'd lost. But instead of spiraling, I learned to sit with those feelings, to let them wash over me without pulling me under. One of the biggest shifts came when I stopped asking why. Why had Ethan done it? Why had he chosen to betray me? Why hadn't I seen it sooner? Those questions had haunted me for months, their answers always just out of reach. But slowly I realized that the why didn't matter as much as I thought it did. What mattered was what I did next. I started focusing on things that brought me joy, however small they seemed. There was a bakery near my apartment that made the most amazing cinnamon rolls, and I made it a habit to stop there every Saturday morning. I began going for walks in the evenings, savoring the quiet and the cool breeze on my face. I even joined a book club, something I never would have done before. It wasn't about filling the void Ethan had left. It was about discovering what made me happy on my own terms. Alyssa and I stayed in touch, though our initial connection evolved into something more distant over time. We met for coffee a few more times, but eventually our conversations dwindled. I think we both needed space to heal in our own ways. Still, I was grateful for the strange bond we had shared. She had been a mirror reflecting back the parts of Ethan's lies that I couldn't see on my own, and for that I would always be thankful. One day, months after I had left Ethan, I received an email from him. It was long, as his letters and messages often were, filled with apologies and explanations I didn't need anymore. But there was one line that stuck with me. "I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to figure out why I did what I did." For the first time, his words didn't provoke anger or sadness. Instead, I felt nothing. He was a chapter of my life that was over, and while I hoped he would find whatever peace he was looking for, his journey was no longer my concern. I deleted the email and didn't look back. As time went on, the life I built for myself began to feel more solid, more real. I redecorated my apartment again, this time with bold colors and artwork that felt uniquely me. I started traveling, visiting places I had always dreamed of but never prioritized. A weekend in New Orleans, a road trip along the California coast, even a solo trip to Paris. All of it felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that I had forgotten existed. It wasn't just about the big adventures, though. It was the quiet moments that meant the most. Curling up with a good book on a rainy afternoon, laughing with friends over wine, waking up on a Sunday morning with nothing to do but sip coffee and watch the world go by. These were the moments that reminded me I was whole, even without the life I had once envisioned. People often talk about closure as if it's something you can find, something tangible you can grasp and hold on to. But for me, closure wasn't about answers or apologies. It was about acceptance. Acceptance that Ethan had made his choices and I had made mine. Acceptance that the life I thought I wanted wasn't the life I was meant to have. And most importantly, acceptance that I deserved more than what he had given me. One evening, as I was sorting through old files on my laptop, I stumbled across a folder of photos from our wedding. For a moment I hesitated, my finger hovering over the delete button. But instead of erasing them, I opened the folder and began scrolling through the images. I didn't feel the sharp pain I had expected. Instead, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were looking at someone else's memories. The woman in those photos wasn't me anymore, and that was okay. She had loved and trusted and dreamed, and though her heart had been broken, she had survived. I closed the folder without deleting it, letting it rest as a relic of a life that had shaped me but no longer defined me. Eventually, I met someone new. It wasn't something I had planned or even sought out, it just happened as these things often do. His name was Daniel, and we met at a friend's dinner party. He was kind in a way that felt genuine, not performative, and he listened when I spoke as though every word mattered. I was cautious at first, terrified of opening myself up again. But Daniel had a way of making me feel safe, like I could be myself without fear of judgment or betrayal. We took things slowly, building a foundation of trust and mutual respect. He knew about Ethan, about everything I had been through, and he never pushed me to move faster than I was ready. With him, I learned that love didn't have to be all-consuming or dramatic to be real. It could be steady and quiet and still leave room for me to be my own person. Looking back now, I see that losing Ethan was the best thing that ever happened to me. It didn't feel like it at the time, it felt like my world was ending. But in the end it was a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to rediscover, to become the woman I was always meant to be. Life isn't perfect and it never will be. But it's mine and that's enough. I'm enough. As life moved forward, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come, though the memories of the past never completely disappeared. They lingered not as sharp pains but as faint echoes, reminders of lessons learned the hard way. The process of healing, I realized, wasn't linear. There were days when I felt invincible, as though nothing could shake me, and other days when the weight of what had happened would press on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But the difference was that I now knew how to face those moments. I didn't shy away from the sadness anymore. I let it pass through me, knowing it was temporary. Ethan had taught me something, though not in the way he might have intended. He taught me how to trust my instincts again. For so long I had ignored the little warning signs, the moments when things didn't quite add up. I had dismissed my own feelings in favor of maintaining the illusion of a perfect life. Now I promised myself I would never silence that inner voice again, even if it told me things I didn't want to hear. As my relationship with Daniel deepened, I found myself testing the boundaries of my newfound resolve. There were times when my past threatened to intrude, when a harmless comment or an innocent action would stir old fears. But Daniel's patience never wavered. He didn't try to fix me or rush me. He simply stood by my side, offering support and reassurance without asking for anything in return. One evening, as we sat on my balcony sharing a bottle of wine, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever think about what you went through? With Ethan, I mean." I looked at him, startled by his honesty. Most people avoided mentioning Ethan altogether, as if his name were a curse that might summon pain. But Daniel wasn't afraid to go there, and his openness encouraged me to do the same. "Sometimes," I admitted, swirling the wine in my glass, "but not in the way I used to. It's like he's a shadow. He's there, but he doesn't block the light anymore. Daniel nodded, his gaze thoughtful. That's a powerful place to be. It is, I said, realizing as I spoke how true it was. I used to think I'd never get past it, that it would always define me. But now it feels like just one part of my story. He smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. You're stronger than you know. Those words stayed with me long after that night. They reminded me of the strength I had found within myself. A strength that had been there all along but had been buried beneath years of doubt and betrayal. I had uncovered it through the pain, and now it was mine to carry forward. Life wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. I started setting bigger goals for myself, both personally and professionally. I applied for a promotion at work, something I had always hesitated to do, and to my surprise, I got it. The new role came with more responsibility, but it also gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I was proud of myself not just for the achievement but for taking the risk in the first place. Outside of work, I continued to explore new hobbies and interests. I joined a hiking group, spending weekends trekking through trails and soaking in the beauty of nature. There was something healing about being surrounded by towering trees and open skies, about pushing my body to its limits and feeling the satisfaction of reaching the summit. Each hike felt like a metaphor for my journey, difficult and exhausting at times, but always worth it when I looked back at how far I had come. As I built this new life, I also redefined my relationships with others. Some friends had drifted away during the chaos of my divorce, unable or unwilling to navigate the uncomfortable reality of my situation. But the ones who stayed became my rock, their loyalty and kindness proving that true friendship could withstand anything. I also reconnected with my parents, who had been quietly worried about me for years. Opening up to them about what I had been through brought us closer than ever before. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly supported, not just by others but by myself. Ethan, meanwhile, faded further into the background of my life. Occasionally, I would hear updates about him through mutual acquaintances, how he had moved to a new city, how he was still trying to piece his life together. I didn't feel anger or pity when I heard his name anymore. I felt nothing. He was a chapter one had closed, a lesson I had learned, and that was enough. 1 year after I left him, I found myself standing on the edge of a cliff, overlooking a vast expanse of ocean. I had taken a solo trip to the Pacific Northwest, a place I had always dreamed of visiting. The wind whipped through my hair as I stood there, the salty air filling my lungs. For a moment I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the waves crashing below wash over me. This was my life now, free, unburdened, and full of possibility. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, sitting on that motel bed with Ethan's phone in her hands, her world crumbling around her. She had been lost, broken, and terrified. But she had also been brave. Brave enough to walk away, brave enough to face the unknown, brave enough to rebuild. As I opened my eyes and stared out at the horizon, I realized I didn't regret anything. Not the pain, not the heartbreak, not the betrayal. It had all led me here, to this moment where I finally felt at peace. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by how I had risen from it. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the water in shades of gold and crimson, I smiled. The future was mine, and I couldn't wait to see what it held. As I stood there on the cliff, the enormity of what I had been through settled into a place that no longer felt heavy. It became part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was, but no longer pulling me down. I turned away from the ocean and walked back along the trail, my footsteps light on the damp earth. The sun was dipping lower now, and the air was growing cooler, but I didn't feel the chill. I felt alive, more alive than I had in years. When I returned to my small rental cabin that evening, the quiet welcomed me like an old friend. There was no one waiting for me, no messages on my phone, no obligations pressing against my mind. Just me, the crackle of the fire I lit in the stone fireplace, and the journal I had started keeping after leaving Ethan. I hadn't written in it in weeks, not because I didn't need it anymore, but because I had been too busy living. I opened the journal and flipped through its pages, skimming the words I had poured out during my darkest moments. Anguish, confusion, rage, it was all there, raw and unfiltered. But as I reached the more recent entries, I noticed a shift. The words were lighter, filled with hope and gratitude. Even on the harder days, there was an undercurrent of resilience. I smiled as I read the last entry, written a few weeks earlier. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm not afraid of the journey anymore. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft sounds of the forest outside, I realized something profound. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting. I wasn't waiting for things to get better, for someone to rescue me, or for some imagined perfect future to unfold. I was here in this moment, and it was enough. When I returned home from the trip, the familiar streets of my neighborhood felt different, as though they had shifted slightly while I was away. Or maybe it was me who had changed. The apartment I had decorated with so much care now felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could thrive instead of merely survive. I unpacked my bags and placed a small seashell I had found on the beach onto the shelf by my window. It wasn't much, but it was a reminder of that cliff, of the strength I had felt standing there. Life continued, but it no longer felt like something I had to endure. It felt like something I got to experience. I found joy in the small things. The warmth of the sun on my face during a morning walk, the laughter of my friends during a game night, the satisfaction of completing a challenging project at work. These moments added up, forming a life that felt full and meaningful. Daniel remained a steady presence, but our relationship was never the center of my world. It was a part of it, a complement to the person I was becoming. We supported each other, but we also gave each other space to grow. There was no need to rush, no pressure to define what we were or where we were going. It was the healthiest relationship I had ever been in, not because it was perfect but because it was honest. We showed up for each other without losing ourselves, and that was enough. One evening, about 2 years after I had left Ethan, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a number I didn't recognize, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. Hello. There was a pause and then a voice I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. Hi, it's Ethan. The sound of his voice didn't send a jolt through me the way it once would have. It didn't stir anger or sadness or longing. It felt distant, like hearing the voice of a character from a book I had read long ago. What do you want, Ethan? I asked, my tone calm but firm. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, he said, stumbling over his words. I've been doing a lot of work on myself, and I realize now how much I hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that. There was a time when I might have clung to those words, when an apology from him would have felt like closure. But now they felt unnecessary. I had already found my peace, and it hadn't come from him. Thank you for saying that, I replied after a moment. I hope you find what you're looking for. And that was it. I ended the call, placed my phone on the table, and went back to what I was doing without a second thought. It wasn't relief or vindication that I felt. It was a quiet affirmation of how far I had come. His apology didn't change anything because I didn't need it to. I had built a life that was whole without him, and that was the greatest closure of all. In the years that followed, I continued to grow in ways I never could have imagined. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, sharing my story with those who were going through their own struggles. It wasn't about reliving my pain. It was about showing others that there was life on the other side of heartbreak, that they could rebuild just as I had. Eventually, I published a memoir, something I had been quietly working on for years. Writing it was cathartic, a way to honor the woman I had been while celebrating the woman I had become. The book didn't become a bestseller or change the world, but it didn't need to. It reached the people who needed it, and that was enough. Looking back now, I hardly recognize the person I was during those dark days. She feels like a stranger, someone I know intimately but who no longer defines me. My life is my own, shaped not by what happened to me but by how I chose to rise from it. And as I stand here today, looking out at a future that is still unwritten, I feel nothing but gratitude. For the pain that taught me strength, for the loss that led me to find myself, and for the love of friends, of family, of myself, that carried me through it all. This is my life, and it is beautiful. Years continued to pass, and the layers of my life grew richer, more textured. I found myself settling into a rhythm that felt uniquely mine, unhurried and unapologetic. The scars left by Ethan's betrayal faded into the background, no longer visible except under the closest scrutiny. They became part of the landscape of who I was, like faint lines on a map, markers of places I had traveled but no longer needed to revisit. My career blossomed in ways I hadn't anticipated. The promotion I had once hesitated to pursue opened doors I didn't even know existed. I began speaking at conferences, mentoring younger colleagues, and taking on projects that challenged me. Work wasn't just a job anymore. It was a place where I thrived, where I poured my energy into creating something meaningful. I felt confident, capable, and most importantly, proud of the woman I was becoming. Outside of work, my life was equally fulfilling. I had built a community of friends who felt like family, people who celebrated my successes, comforted me in my struggles, and reminded me of the joy in simply living. We hosted dinner parties, went on impromptu weekend trips, and spent countless evenings talking about everything and nothing over glasses of wine. These friendships were deep and genuine, built on mutual respect and trust, and they anchored me in a way that felt unshakable. Daniel remained in my life, and over time, what had started as a slow, tentative relationship grew into something solid and enduring. He wasn't just my partner. He was my best friend, my confidant, my safe place. With him, love wasn't a performance or a transaction. It was a quiet, steady presence that made me feel seen and valued. We shared our dreams, our fears, and our plans for the future, but we also gave each other space to be individuals. That balance was what made us work, what made our love feel so different from anything I had experienced before. One summer evening, as we sat on the porch of the house we had recently moved into together, Daniel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about writing another book?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. My memoir had been such a deeply personal project, one that I had poured my heart into during a time of healing. I hadn't considered writing anything else, but as I thought about his question, a spark of excitement flickered within me. "Maybe," I said, smiling, "but this time I think I'd want to write about joy, about finding yourself after everything falls apart." Daniel's face lit up. "I think a lot of people would want to read that." His encouragement stayed with me, and over the next few months I began drafting ideas for a new book. This time the words came easily, flowing from a place of growth and gratitude rather than pain. I wrote about the strength that comes from starting over, the beauty of discovering who you are when you're no longer tied to someone else's expectations, and the quiet, unexpected moments that make life worth living. The process was cathartic, a way to reflect on how far I had come, and to share the lessons I had learned along the way. As the book took shape, I realized how much I had changed since the days when I had felt defined by Ethan's betrayal. That version of me, the one who had sobbed on a motel bed, who had combed through his phone in disbelief, who had confronted him with shaking hands and a breaking heart, felt like a distant memory. She wasn't gone, but she had transformed. She had grown into someone who knew her worth, who had learned to let go of what no longer served her, and who had embraced the uncertainty of life with open arms. The book, titled Reclaimed, Finding Yourself After the Fall, was published 2 years later. It wasn't a runaway bestseller, but it resonated with those who needed it most. Letters and emails poured in from readers who shared their own stories of heartbreak and resilience, who thanked me for giving them hope. Each message reminded me why I had written it in the first place. Not for fame or success, but to connect, to inspire, and to show others that they weren't alone. In the years that followed, life continued to unfold in beautiful, unpredictable ways. Daniel and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. There were no grand gestures, no over-the-top declarations, just a quiet, heartfelt celebration of the love we had built together. Our vows reflected the simplicity and sincerity of our relationship, and as we exchanged rings, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. We traveled together, exploring places we had both dreamed of visiting: Italy, Japan, South Africa. Each trip was an adventure, not just in discovering new landscapes but in deepening our connection. We hiked through rolling vineyards, tasted unfamiliar foods, and marveled at sunsets that painted the skies in colors too vivid to describe. These moments weren't just memories, they were pieces of a life that felt full and authentic. Eventually, we decided to start a family. It was a decision we approached with equal parts excitement and apprehension, knowing it would change everything but feeling ready for the challenge. When our daughter Lily was born, I felt a love so profound it brought tears to my eyes. Holding her in my arms, I realized that every choice I had made, every step I had taken to rebuild my life, had led me to this moment. She was my proof that life could begin again, even after it had been shattered. As Lily grew, so did I. Motherhood wasn't easy, But it was a journey that taught me even more about resilience, patience, and unconditional love. Watching her take her first steps, hearing her laugh for the first time, and seeing the world through her curious eyes reminded me of how much beauty there was in the simple things. Through it all, I never forgot the woman I had been, the one who had faced heartbreak and betrayal, who had doubted herself but found the courage to move forward. She was still a part of me, a reminder of how far I had come and how much I had overcome. But she wasn't the whole story. She was just the beginning. Now, as I sit here writing these words, the sun streaming through the window of my home office, I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that shaped me, for the love that healed me, and for the life I have created. A life that is mine wholly and completely. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing for certain. I am ready for it, whatever it may bring. And so, as the chapters of my life continued to unfold, I realized that I had written my own story. Not just in the literal sense, but in every choice I made, every step I took toward building a life that felt true. The heartbreak that had once consumed me had long since transformed into something else. A quiet strength, a deep understanding of who I was and what I deserved. Ethan's betrayal, as devastating as it had been, was no longer a shadow over my happiness. Instead, it had become a defining moment, not because of what he had done, but because of how I had risen from it. He was just a thread in the tapestry of my life, a strand that had woven in and out, but ultimately made the whole picture richer, more complete. With Daniel, Lily, and the life we'd created, I found a joy that was steady and enduring, not fleeting or conditional. It wasn't the kind of happiness that came from grand gestures or dramatic moments, but from the everyday beauty of living with intention and love. It was in the way Daniel made me laugh on difficult days, in Lily's giggles as she ran barefoot through the yard, in the sunsets we watched as a family, holding hands and feeling the warmth of the moment. And it was in me, in the way I had learned to value myself, to embrace my flaws and strengths alike, and to trust in my ability to face whatever came next. The life I lived now wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Daniel and Lily, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, I felt a profound sense of peace. Lily was asleep in my lap, her tiny hands clutching my shirt, while Daniel's arm rested around my shoulders. The world felt quiet, still, and full of possibility. "This is it," I whispered, mostly to myself. Daniel glanced at me, smiling softly. "What's that?" "This," I said, gesturing to the scene around us. "This is everything I ever needed." He kissed the top of my head and nodded. "It's everything I needed too." As the first stars appeared in the sky, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, letting the moment settle into my soul. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time I didn't feel the need to plan or control it. I had faith in the journey, in the twists and turns that had brought me here and the ones still to come. I wasn't the same woman I had been before, and I would never be her again. But I didn't want to be. I had become someone stronger, someone braver, someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side glowing. This was my life, and it was beautiful. I was ready for whatever came next.